Well, in principle, based on the data we receive from the General Staff daily, the picture practically looks like the occupiers are currently trying, one way or another, to reach the borders of the Donetsk region. Will they stop after that? This question is, let's say, not so much rhetorical, but everyone understands perfectly well that they will not. And right now, information has also somehow come into sharp focus that Putin is possibly trying to break through to the borders of the so-called Transnistria through the south of Ukraine. And in connection with this, a question also arises. Is there any confirmation from the situation currently unfolding in the south of Ukraine regarding the actions of the Russian occupiers in this direction? In general, what is the situation on the front line today? What is the state of affairs? What is happening there? So, please, I would like to hear your opinion.
While cutting off the south, breaking through to Transnistria, that's nothing new. Such plans have existed among the Russians since 2014. The same goes for creating a land corridor to Crimea. So, what happened at the end of February, not even the beginning of March 2022, in the south of our country, was absolutely predictable. Since 2014, 8 years. The same applies to the south. But now let's move on to the actual battlefield, because without solving the tasks of the offensive operation now, the enemy will not be able to solve other strategic tasks either. Well, based on the successes and failures of the Russians in the north and in the east and in the south, we can state that they will no longer be able to pull off two strategic operations with the resources they have. The Russians' task at the moment is not even to reach the borders of the Donetsk region. The idea in 2020, in the winter of 2025 to 2026, in the summer of 2026, was to achieve superiority by encircling the main grouping of Ukrainian forces and subsequently defeating them. That is, in fact, the grouping of forces that we have located in the northwest of the Donetsk region. So the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, it's not the agglomeration that's the target, but the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk grouping of forces. If they are surrounded, even if not yet defeated, then with this encirclement, this strategic encirclement, one could blackmail Ukraine, like a trump card, forcing it to capitulate. That is where the direction of the main strikes comes from. From the south, it's the Pokrovsk Kostiantynivka direction. From the east, it's the Lyman Slovyansk direction. Let's call them that. These are the points where the main efforts are being applied. The auxiliary direction is in the south. And what happened in the south? The counterattacks by the Ukrainian Defense Forces at the beginning in the first half of 2026, well, it was driven by these successes and our ability, despite everything, to find additional resources or concentrate them in a key direction, at least at the tactical level. Well, here it's already operational tactical, just as it was with the Dobropilya salient in 25 and as it was with Kupiansk during that same period, and also conducting operations for a logistical lockdown to bleed the enemy dry, which will lead to their embitterment. But in the south, it wasn't possible to turn the situation around. They managed to stabilize the situation somehow because throughout 2025, remember, from the Kurakov Reservoir flanking our defenses, the Russians covered, I think, half the distance from Kurakov to Zaporizhzhia. Now they're being pushed out from the Dnipropetrovsk region, from the north there. At the same time, we couldn't manage to reach even Huliaipol. It's a difficult situation, and in the east it's even harder because that's the direction of the main offensives. The east supporters, who are more or less reasonable, when they whine about their failures in the south, blame their command for moving reserves from the south precisely to the flanks of the Donetsk direction to reinforce attempts to break through to Dobropilya from the side of Pokrovska or through Kostiantynivka to Druzhkivka, getting into the rear of our force grouping. The situation is also difficult in the Slavyansk direction. It's better in others. In the Kupiansk one, you read that combat clashes occurred. That doesn't mean that these are the enemy's attempts to advance. The situation in the near future may demonstrate serious tactical successes. Therefore, the situation is not unpredictable, but different in different sectors of the front. To say that we have seized the strategic initiative from the enemy on the battlefield, on the ground, that would not be correct. But the Russians, by mid August already, well, there's a maximum of a month and a half left in the summer campaign, have not been able to achieve their strategic goals. What they have achieved are tactical successes.
Let's go back, Pavel, to the Hulaya Pole direction. The thing is, the general staff is recording a sharp decrease in combat clashes in this direction, a significant decrease, and there are various assessments of what is happening. Well, it's obvious that this is to the credit of our defenders. I'd like to ask you to say a few words about this specifically. We will be talking about this more in our final segment. That's why your opinion is especially needed by our editorial team.
Well, partly due to the fact that after the announcement by the command of the air assault forces of Ukraine regarding the situation in the north and in the Alexandrivka direction, the Russian command in this sector of combat operations is forced to redeploy part of its forces to the north in order to at least somehow show the restoration of those positions that the defense forces have liberated over the last 5 months. Look at how quickly the Z supporters are repainting their maps, right? How fakes are being edited and manufactured about flag planting in those settlements that the defense forces of Ukraine have liberated. Now, the disclosure of this information has become a catalyst for the intensification of combat operations precisely in the Alexandrivka direction. And that is precisely why we have said and continue to say that when combat operations require silence, right? As long as it was all developing in silence, that's one process. When it's brought out into the light, the situation looks completely different.
Uh huh. And Pavel, how would you characterize the overall situation, perhaps, given that we are slowly approaching autumn? And I understand, well, hypothetically, that some kind of autumn campaign will be prepared, at least in the sense that the weather will change and the conditions for combat operations will change, and everything else. And if you look at how the Russian Federation is behaving right now, we can see just how actively they are trying to produce ballistic missiles or obtain them from North Korea. How actively is civilian infrastructure being shelled right now? And can we form some kind of impression about what their plans might be for the fall and what we might see in the near future?
Well, the same ones as ours, actually. If we're talking about the air campaign, then summer. It's ballistics. Because cruise missiles and drones, they are destroyed by aviation. That's it. Aviation works well against cruise missiles, so their use is limited. The emphasis is on ballistics, taking into account that we, the defenders, don't have enough anti-missile defense. Well, in particular, Patriot air defense systems. As weather conditions change with low cloud cover, it will be harder for aviation to operate, which means the number of cruise missiles and air attacks will increase. On the other hand, well, we're only talking about ballistics so far. And if we can quickly ramp up mass production, this window of opportunity is a few months. Then winter, that's more cruise missiles again. Which, by the way, is something where we aren't that far behind the enemy, right? We already have a fairly diverse arsenal of cruise missiles, both traditional ones, I mean the Neptune and Flamingo, and drone missiles, essentially jet-powered drones. These are effectively small cruise missiles.
July became one of the bloodiest months for Russia since the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine. The occupying forces suffered record losses on the battlefield. This is reported by the American publication New York Post. According to journalists, in July, the Russian army lost nearly 43,000 personnel in killed and wounded. This is the highest figure since January 2025, and the fourth bloodiest month since the start of the full-scale war. Recruiting new soldiers is becoming an increasingly bigger problem for Russian dictator Putin, writes the New York Post. Let's take a look at an excerpt from the publication.
In recent months, Putin has become so desperate that he has had to lure his compatriots into the war with false promises of easy service, or recruit Africans through similar fraudulent schemes. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Ukraine have liberated about 780 square kilometers on the southern front, recapturing 26 settlements along the front line and returning them to full Ukrainian control. The defense forces have pushed back Russian troops by more than 11 kilometers in the southern direction, not far from the intersection of the Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions. These small attacks are gradually undermining Russian control. From a publication by the New York Post.
Well, Pavel, we were talking earlier with you about resources, about drones, missiles, but people aren't made as quickly as drones and missiles. And in this sense, there are currently about 700,000 troops of Putin's army fighting on the territory of Ukraine. And now we are approaching the moment of the elections. They have their so-called elections in September. That's because, as we see now from the data of our respected American colleagues, there are truly huge losses, some of the largest in the entire war. Will they still manage to recruit new draftees, to lead new Russians to war?
And recruiting is half the battle. Half the battle. You have to turn recruits into some kind of soldiers. That's what the mobilization machine exists for. It's not just a matter of taking a civilian, appointing them as a soldier, and sending them onto the battlefield. These people need to be clothed, shod, armed, given individual training, and formed into units. They need to undergo combat coordination so that they can operate as part of a squad, platoon, and higher. And only then can this reinforcement be sent to the troops. The Russian mobilization machine, well, based on the experience of the previous 4 years, its real capacity is somewhere around 35,000. And when the defense forces reach the threshold of 30,000, 30 and a little more, yes, of destroyed, incapacitated, or orcs within a month, it presented the Russians with a dilemma. So we have completed the task halfway, and they have to either form reserves to build on their success or replenish current losses in their units and formations. Those 35,000 that are being lost every month. Now, when we are talking about over 40,000, it turns out that they cannot create reserves, and they cannot replenish these resources either. So the mobilization machine needs to be changed. And, well, everything is ready for mobilization for the Russians. Actually, it hasn't been canceled since 2022. They just conditionally put it on pause, saying, no, it's not continuing. But the mobilization decree is still in effect. That is why there is no demobilization for the Russian military, because the decree is still in force. Additional legislative acts are being introduced, which indirectly point to tightening the screws and preparing society for a transition to a war footing, effectively for mass mobilization. Whether or not this will be implemented somewhere depends on Putin, personally on Putin, as the author of the mobilization decree.
He is it.
He gives the go-ahead. The security forces catch people and drive them into the army. But beyond that, the capabilities of this mobilization machine are limited. Either it's like the year 22, the fall of 22, when the surplus of this Russian meat is greater than what it can process. And then the quality of the human material at the output is significantly lower than the necessary level. Or they will compensate somehow, using external resources like North Koreans or Belarusians. At the same time, we need to watch carefully to see if they will expand this bottleneck of the mobilization machine, right? Training grounds, training centers, and so on. These will be the final signs of an expansion of mobilization.
Thank you. Thank you, Pavel. We appreciate it. Pavlo Lakiychuk, head of military security programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21.